We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph in Mesechet Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 43a. This Daf is sponsored by David Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an Amud or Daf, see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. The Gemara continues. Again, the case over here is that the person who was watching over the hops, he directed the person who was brewing the beer to take from his own hops, not to take from the deposit. Instead, the person took from the deposit, and the question is, how exactly do we rule in this case? And the Gemara now is going according to an interpretation that what we're talking about over here is that the hops that were deposited, they had thorns in them, and so therefore he used it to make the beer, but it was really an inferior quality. And so the Gemara ultimately says, Umashalim le to make kisi, so he pays him the value of these hops, assuming again that they have the thorns within them. We'll take a look at Rashi. Rashi explains, Umashalim lo to make kisi, to make kashus shal kotzim, lafi masha ishbiach. He pays him the value of the hops which have thorns in them, according to how they improved, how they made the beer. We'll take a look at Tosas on the previous Amud as well. Tosas in the previous Amud says bikisi. Again, we're talking about a situation where they have thorns. Perish Rashi explains that this was Rashi in the previous Amud. Shaya kashus mole kotzim, that the hops were filled with thorns. V'lo hishbiach b'sheicher ki ma'at, and therefore, when it was used for the beer, it only improved the beer a little bit. V'yim Tomar Satosis asks, Pshita shalo yiten yoser ela kemosha shavel hatel b'sheicher. Of course, he's only going to pay. He's not going to pay more than what the improvement actually was. If it was used to make the beer and there was only a certain level of improvement, you're not going to pay more than that. So what's going on over here exactly with this answer of Rav Ashi? And Tosas' answer, V'yesh lomar de'afa pishayu shavim yoser l'maychel behema. The chiddush over here is as follows. If you would have used these hops to feed to animals, it actually would have been worth more. But even though that's the case, lo yishalim elamasha shavel l'sheicher. You only have to pay the value of what it would be worth for the beer, because that's ultimately what he used it for. The ru'uyin heim lebehema, because you could have used these hops for an animal. Kedamar b'hamotziyayin, like we say in Perak hamotziyayin. Tosas go on to bring another explanation as well. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamafkid mos eitzel shulchani. If somebody deposits money by a money changer, im tzerurin, if the money is bundled, lo yishtamish behen, he shouldn't use the money. Lefikach im avdu, and therefore if it's lost, eino chai b'achriyus, and he's not responsible. Mutarin, however, if it is untied, if it's not bundled, yishtamish behen, then he is allowed to use the money. Lefikach im avdu chai b'achriyus, and therefore if it's lost, he is going to be responsible. And the Mishnah continues, eitzel balabayis, if he deposits the money by a balabayis, by a regular individual, not somebody who's a money changer, so then it doesn't matter, bein serurin uvein mutarin, whether it's bound or whether it's unbound, lo yishtamish ben, he should not use the money, lefikach im avdu, eino chai b'achriyus, and therefore if it's lost, he is not responsible. And the Mishnah continues, chenvani kebalabayis, a storekeeper is the same as a balabayis. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, chenvani keshulchani, a storekeeper has the same status as a money changer. And the Gemara says, mishum d'tzururin lo yishtamish behen, because of the fact that it's bundled, therefore he doesn't use it. And the Gemara says to that, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav Yehuda. Ravasi says that Rav Yehuda says, B'tzururin v'chasumin shana. We're talking about a case where it's bundled, where it's bound rather, but it's also sealed, and that indicates that he shouldn't use it. Rav Mari, Amar Rav Mari says, B'kesher meshuna. We're talking about a strange kind of a knot, a strange kind of way of bundling it. Ika diamri, there are those that say, Boy, Rav Mari. Rav Mari asked this as a question. Kesher meshuna mai, if it's a strange knot, what would be the halacha? And take when the Gemara leaves that as a question. And Rashi explains, Mishum d'tzururin lo yishtamish ben, because it's bound, he can't use them. Bitmiya, there's like a question. Uma giloi das yeshkan shein chavetz sheyishtamish behem sheyishtamish ben. How does that show that he doesn't want the money changer to use them? Me'achar shemheim mutarin koram yishtamish ben. If you're already saying that if it's untied, so then he's allowed to use them. The hamafkid etzlo yodeya shu tzarich tadir lamos tzururinami yishtamish. Because again, the mafkid realizes that a money changer uses money, so then if it's bound also he should use it. The derech kol adam lotzar mos. If everybody binds the money, everybody puts their money in a bundle, what does that indicate? And so that's why the Gemara answered, either we're talking about where it's sealed, or we're talking about where it's a kesher meshuna. And again, the Gemara had another version that maybe it's a question by a kesher meshuna. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Mutarn yishtamish bohen v'chulu. If the money that was given to the money changer is unbound, then he is allowed to use them, and therefore he is responsible. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna says, Ve'afilu nensu. Even if there was an onus, he's going to be responsible at the level of a shoel, at the level of a borrower, and he's going to be responsible even for accidents. The Gemara says, Va'avdu katani, but it says in the Mishnah that they got lost. It doesn't say there was an accident. And the Gemara answers to that, Kedirab, it follows what Rabba said. Diyamar Rabba, because Rabba said, Nignevu belistim mizuyin. He said in another context, when it says stolen, it might mean mean armed robbers, which would be considered an accident. So when it comes to lost as well, shetavas v'naso bayam, it could be that the ship sank at the sea, and that would also be considered an accident, even though it is technically lost. Our Mishnah is talking about an accident. That's the opinion of Rav Huna. For Rav Nachman says, Nen Sulo, it's not true. He's not responsible for accidents. He's only at the level of a Shomer Sacher. He's only responsible for Geneva V'Aved if it gets stolen or if it's lost. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman, Rava said to Rav Nachman, L'didach da amrit nen sulo. According to you, who says that he's not responsible for accidents, Alma lo have a shoel alai. You see that he's not a shoel. So he's shoel lo have. So if he's not a shoel, if he's not a borrower, Shomer Sacher nami lo have. So he shouldn't be a Shomer Sacher either. In other words, if the fact that he's able to use the money does not make him a shoel, why does that make him a Shomer Sacher? And the Gemara says to that, Amar le said to him, that I admit, meaning to say, I admit that he is a Shomer Sacher at least, even though he's not a shoel. The reason is because there is a benefit he's deriving from this money. If it should happen that there's a purchase that he can make a profit, he can use this money. So that's kind of like a payment. He has a benefit he gets from this money. He becomes like a Shomer Sacher. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rav Nachman l'Rav Huna. Rav Nachman asked Rav Huna the following question. This is from a Mishnah in Me'ilah. Hamafkid mos eitzel shulchani. If a person deposits money by a money changer, im tzururin lo yishtamish ben. If they're bound, so then he shouldn't use them. Lefikach im hotzi. Therefore, if he does spend the money, lo mal hagizbor. So therefore, the treasurer, this is talking about a situation where the money is from hektish, the treasurer will not have committed Me'ilah because he's giving it to him in a fashion that says it's not supposed to be used. V'mutar, but if it is not bound, so then so then the money changer is allowed to use them. And therefore, if he does spend the money, if he does use the money, Ma'al HaGizbar, the treasurer has committed Me'ilah, because again, he's used the mos of Hektish, he's used the money of Hektish for something that it should not be used for. And so the Gemara now asks, now if you say Afilu Nensu, meaning Rav Nachman is asking Rav Huna, if you say that the halach is that the fact that you can use it makes you like a shoel, and you're responsible even for onsim, even for accidents, so if that's the case, my ir Yehotzi, why do we have to say that the shulchani, that the money changer has to spend the money in order for it to be me'ilah? Afilu lo hotzinami, even if he doesn't spend the money, it should be considered me'ilah, because now it's essentially completely in his rishus. That's the idea that he's responsible for accidents, so it's like he's taken it out of the rishus of hektish. And so the Gemara says, Amar le, he said back to him, you're actually correct, hu adin nafal gav de lo hotzi. The same would be true, even if he didn't actually spend the money, still we would say that there is me'ilah, because just the fact that it was given to the person unbound, and that he was permitted to use it, and that he was responsible for onsim, that is enough to say that the Gizbar commits Me'ilah. V'aydi detana reisha hotzi, and it was only since in the beginning of the Mishnah it talks about spending it, because it talks about the fact that if he spends the money, where in the case where the money is bound, so it says there the treasurer does not commit Me'ilah, there it's talking about where it's spent. So Tana Seifa Nami Hotzi, so at the end of the Mishnah as well, it talks about the fact that he spends the money, but really it's going to be Me'ilah, even if he does not spend the money. And Rashi explains, Hamafkid Mos, Gizbar, Shehifkid Mos, Hektish, Kesavar, Shein Shalo. The case over here is the treasurer. He takes money of Hektish and he deposits it by somebody. He thinks it's his money. It actually belongs to Hektish. So Lo Moal Gizbar. So then we said that if he gives it to him bound, in that situation, it's not Me'ilah from the Gizbar, Sharei Lo Bereshus Hotzion, because he wasn't really supposed to spend it. He wasn't allowed to spend it when it's bound. Ve'eno Shlucha, so he's not like he's the Shliach of the Gizbar. However, Mutar, if it's not bound, Dahavale Kenos and Reshus, then it's already as if the Gizbar gave the person he's depositing the money to the money changer. It's as if he gave him permission to spend it. And it's like he's a shliach, and that's why he commits me'ilah in that case. That's why, again, if the shulchani spends the money, so the treasurer, the gizbar, has committed me'ilah. And so the Gemara then asked, now if you're going to say that in such a situation he's like a borrower, he's responsible even for onsim, meaning that's the extent that the money changer is chayiv and achrayis. It comes out from the moment that the money was deposited by the shulchani. Yatsu mereshus hektish, they've already left reshus hektish. That's the idea of being chayiv in onsim, of being chayiv for accidents. Ubol reshus shulchani, they're already in the reshus of the money changer. V'nasa k'moshe hilvelo, it's almost as if he lent him the money. Vein hotzah gedola mizu, there's no greater spending of the money than that. So my ir yehotzi, why does it have to say anything in the Mishnah about the money changer spending the money? It's already spent, so to speak. And the Gemara then said, I did the tana reisha hotzi, since in the beginning of the Mishnah talks about spending, lashmin and ribusa da afilu hotzi lo mal, because there it's a chiddush to say even if the money is spent, the gizbar does not commit me'ilah. Tana seifa hotzi, so that's why at the end of the Mishnah also talks about hotzi, but really there's me'ilah even if it was not spent. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hasholeach yad b'pikad, and if somebody misappropriates a deposit, Beis Shammai omer miyilka b'chaser v'yeser. Beis Shammai say that the punishment is that he has to pay whether there's a loss, whether there's a higher amount. What it means to say is you're always going to pay the higher amount, as we'll see in Rashi. Beis Hillel omer and Beis Hillel say kashas hotzah, the amount you have to pay is the amount it was worth at the time of the spending. And Rabbi Akiva omer, Rabbi Akiva says kashas hatzvi, it's the amount that it was worth at the time of the claim. Rashi here explains, Yilka b'chaser v'yeser, he is hit, so to speak, he's punished with the loss, the depreciation, or if there's an appreciation. And Rashi explains, let's say, for example, it depreciates in value, shehuzla b'shuk, that this item is now worth less in the marketplace, yeshalim dameh kamo shahisa shava b'shah sheshalach bayad. So, according to Beis Shammai, he then has to pay according to the amount that it was worth at the time that he misappropriated it, shishas hagazela, which is the time that it was stolen, and meaning to say, therefore, he's going to pay the higher amount. And that's true by all of those who steal. They have to pay according to what it was worth at the time of the gazela. And the case over here is that it was spent. The item is no longer in front of us. Now, if it is still in front of us, exactly the same, the item is exactly the same as it was when it was stolen, so then already it's a whole different situation. He can say, take what is yours. He can just give back the item. Like we say in Babba Kama. So that's what it means b'chaser. And Rashi continues, uveyeser, also if it appreciates, he has to pay the higher amount. That means to say, imshasa biyado mishashalach bayad. Let's say the item is still in his possession after he misappropriates the item. V'nisiyakor, it actually increases in value. V'yachar kachotzi, and then he spends the item. Loka biyeser damel l'shalim kashas hotzah. Then again, he has to pay the higher amount, the amount it was worth at the time it was spent. And Rashi continues, Beis Hillel omer v'chulu, again, Beis Hillel said that you have to pay according to the amount it was worth at the time it was spent. Rashi says, B'gemar mefarish my ka'amri, the Gemara will explain what exactly Beis Hillel is saying. And finally, you have Rabbi Akiva who says, Kashas hatviyah, you have to pay what it was worth, like the time it was claimed, means Kashas sheyitvu ladin, at the time he's claimed in court, in judgment, to V'gemar mefarish time. And the Gemara will explain the reason. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabba says, Haiman de Gozel Chavisa de Chamra Mechavri. If somebody steals a barrel of wine from his friend, Meikara Shavya Zuzah, originally it's worth 1 zuz, but Hashta Shavya Arba, but now it's worth 4 zuz, it goes up in value. And Tavro Shasya, then he either breaks the barrel or he drinks the wine from the barrel. So Meshalim Arba, so in that situation he has to pay the higher amount. That's the amount it was worth at the time that he broke the barrel or at the time that he drunk from the barrel, he has to pay the 4 zuz. But Itbar Mamela, but let's say it just breaks on its own, so then Meshalim Zuzah, so then he just pays 1 zuz, that's the amount it was worth at the time that it was stolen. And the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? Kevon di Isa, since if this barrel of wine was still around at this point in time, Hadra Lamara Be'ena, so you would just return it to the owner as is. So Ahishaita de Kashasi Leo de Katavarla, so at the moment that he's drinking from it, or at the moment that he's breaking it, Kagazal Mine, that's the moment that he's really stealing it. Utnana, we learned in the Mishnah, Kal Hagazlon and Mishalman Kashas Hagazela, that people that steal, they have to pay what it's worth at the time that it was stolen. And so that's why in the case where he breaks it or he drinks from it, he has to pay the higher amount. However, Itzvar Memela, however, if it breaks on its own, Mishalim Zuzah, so then he just pays 1 zuz, that's what it was worth at the time that he stole it. My time, what's the reason? Hashta lo avid lo v'lo midi. Right now he's doing nothing. Amai kama chayev, so why is he chayev? And what moment was he really chayev? Ahishaita de gozle, he's chayev for the moment that he stole it, and ahishaita zuzah hu deshavi. At that moment it was only worth 1 zuz. And the Gemara says, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Beis Hillel Omer and Beis Hillel say, Keshas hotzah, he has to pay what it was worth at the time that it was spent, meaning to say, again, in this situation of a deposit, in the case of a deposit, so he misappropriated it, and then it goes up in value, it goes by the Shas hotzah. And so the Gemara says, my Keshas hotzah, what does that mean exactly, Keshas hotzah? Ilema Keshas hotzah min ha'olam. If you're going to say that we're talking about a situation that the time that it essentially is spent, it's no longer in front of us, so uvamai, so what exactly is the case that Beis Hillel is talking about? Did it go up in value? Did it go down in value? If you're going to say that it actually went down in value, so mi'ikol aman damar, would anyone say that? But we learned in the Mishnah, all those who steal, they have to pay like the moment it was stolen, meaning to say, if at the time that he misappropriated the item, it was worth a higher amount of money, and then it went down in value, and then there was the shas hotzah, the time that it's no longer in front of us, the time that he spent it, so to speak, you would certainly pay the higher amount, because you have to pay kashas hagazela. V'i b'yeser, and if you're going to say that the case of Beis Hillel is that it actually goes up in value, and we mean to say that he has to pay the higher amount, the shas hotzah, but hainu Beis Shammai, that's exactly what Beis Shammai said, and then Beis Hillel is not arguing on Beis Shammai. And Rashi explains, uvamaya haya pligi Beis Hillel, meaning on what specific case is Beis Hillel arguing? If we're talking about a situation where it goes down in value from the time that he misappropriated it, kishahuzla, meaning again it goes down. Meaning Beis Shammai said you have to pay the higher amount what it was worth at the time it was stolen. And then Beis Hillel is saying no, it has to be like the time that it was spent. But does anyone say that in a situation where the item that was stolen is no longer in front of us, does anyone say that you don't pay kashas hagazela? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis.